10 Sufi thoughts. These are essential principles of the Sufi way, which were articulated by Pir Murshid Inayat-khan about 100 years ago. And when we met some time ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, we looked at the first one. There is one God, one being. And now we come to the second of the thoughts, and that is this. There is one master, the guiding spirit of all souls, who constantly leads followers towards the light. One master. As we've been studying the teachings on the mysticism of sound, the significance of words, our attention is drawn to the power that words have. And certainly Murshid chose his words very carefully. Even though English wasn't his first language was Urdu and Gujarati, but he learned English and he used it very carefully. Nonetheless, even words that he carefully chose have connotations that are perhaps different from what he intended in a certain place. So in this case, we are confronted with the word master. And I'm very conscious of the really awful connotations of that word, especially living now in Richmond and having recently had the chance to visit the place where enslaved people were brought for sale. The word master conjures up the master of something owned, and within the institution of slavery, another human being. And so it might not be surprising if some readers seeing this phrase would be taken aback by that word, a master. Do we want to have a master? To apply the principle of husn-i-zan, or thinking the best, trying to understand the inner meaning of what is intended, the good intention. In this case, what I think is clear that Murshid meant is not master in the sense of one who controls or owns something else or someone else, but master in the sense of one who possesses himself or herself. Self-mastery, self-possession, being in full possession of one's action and speech and thought. And this is what is conveyed in, for instance, in the sense of the mastery of an instrument, the mastery of art, the sense of excellence, a mastermind, the sense of having a degree of intentionality and self-possession that brings fruitfulness in what one does. So we might interpret this word in this sense, the word of master, not as someone that's going to control other people, not as someone that is going to exert domination over anyone, but someone who is fully present to him or herself, which is to say, who is an example of the self-luminosity of the soul's inherent luminous I-ness, and that luminous I-ness, which is kindled by the one light, flows through all of the acts of such a being. And those who live this way, those who are not buffeted by the winds of conditioning and impressions and uncontrolled appetites and unconscious desires, the one who fully occupy their own state, who are fully present, the one whose soul is where her feet are and whose feet are where her soul is, that one attains self-mastery. So when we look back through history and see such beings who have attained this kind of peace and clarity, we can recognize them as great beings, and their greatness attracts us and shows us the path toward that fullness, that wholeness that they exemplify. And so this principle then goes a step further and says that given that there are such beings in the world, down through history, in all ages, in all times, can we not recognize that they altogether form a lineage of grace, an unfolding story of the potentiality within humanity, and that in a sense, they are all the many countenances of one guiding light. Now, this realization exists in many spiritual traditions. The recognition that the prophets and prophetesses of various historical periods are all examples of something that is universal. In the Mahabharata, for instance, one hears the name of Hiranyagarbha, who is called the founder of yoga, and whose name, Hiranyagarbha, the golden embryo, connotes the one in whom are strung together all of the illuminated souls. And then you come to the Buddhist doctrine of Tathagata Garbha, who is the Buddha nature, the Buddha womb, actualized in all those who attain Buddhahood. In the Jewish tradition, there is the Shekinah that descends on human beings in moments of great clarity. And in the Christian tradition, the Veros Propheta, the true prophet, who, as it were, migrates through the stories of all of the biblical prophets, but who is really one guiding light. Also the cosmic Christ, mentioned by Irenaeus. That is to say, that Christ was not only a historical personality, but that the inner being of Christ is that guiding spirit that can be found in many manifestations. And in the Sufism of Islam, the Nuri Muhammadi, the Muhammadan light, the light of the Prophet Muhammad, which is the same light to be found in all of the prophets and prophetesses. For the proponents of philosophy, this figure is known as the Aql-i Qul, which is to say the universal mind that within creation is inherent a consciousness, and the sum of that consciousness is a guiding force that draws the creation ever onward. That is the light of all minds, the mastermind, and that mind was already the sun at the dawn of creation, that mind is an emanation of the divine intelligence working its way through creation. So from this perspective, we see that all of the great prophets and prophetesses were human beings whose high state brought them into communion with a field of consciousness in which their minds were absorbed. Now, this is beautifully expressed in the words of Khalifa Nargis Dowland, who is one of my very favorite Sufi authors, and whose works I recommend to you very highly. She reflects on this phenomenon and writes, "The body of the master, if one can use such a term, magnetic field would better express it, is composed of the perfected souls of those beings who, in every age since the beginning of this earth, have reached the state of evolution known to mystics as perfection. The guiding or informing spirit is the same in every holy name and form. Collectively, they form the embodiment of the one Christ. As individuals, they have been and still are separate, distinct, and living, but their souls form one spirit, which is known as the spirit of guidance. This will, in some measure, explain to those who have understanding the mystery of many masters, but only one master, many religions, but only one religion, many truths, but only one truth. And there is still a further mystery. Every soul that reaches perfection is an enrichment of that mystical body, which by the evolution of perfected souls attains its own fulfillment. But of this words may not be spoken, only to the closed senses can it be revealed." So Khalifa Nargis Dowland here is speaking of a magnetic body, a field of consciousness that is entered into by those who reach a certain state of illumination, and thereby each prophet or prophetess, each illuminated soul who enters it partakes of that great vastness of knowing and brings the enrichment of his or her own soul. And so in the course of prophetic history, each prophet has both partaken of that one guiding spirit and has exemplified a particular quality, a particular personality, a particular fragrance, which has its own note. And therefore, the messages brought by all of the prophets are one message, and yet in their articulation, there are these nuances, there are these differences, which illustrate the particular natures of the particular souls who have been the conveyors of each. And so, according to Sheikh al-Akbar Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi, there are inheritances from the prophets. According to a hadith, the words of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the prophets are alive in their graves praying, which is to say that the personalities of the prophets do not end centuries ago. Those personalities are still living and still influential in this world. And there are inheritances, there are legacies from those prophets that are available to those who turn to them. Now, if one's theory of religion is premised on absolute separation between the messages, then one is confined to the understanding that only Buddhists could possibly access the legacy of the Buddha, or only Zoroastrians could be connected with the legacy of the prophet Zarathustra, or only Christians partake of the spirit of Christ. But on the other hand, if one is able to see the whole cycle of prophecy as one planetary lineage, and the social divisions between people as largely social constructs, then one can see that the inheritance of all prophets is potentially available to all souls. And this is what Ibn Arabi speaks of when he describes his own experience of wirasa, which is to say, the legacy of the prophet. He says that there was a time when he was under the tutelage of the prophet Moses. He remained a Muslim, he remained a member of the Ummah of the Prophet Muhammad, but he was under the tutelage of Moses. Another time he was under the tutelage of Jesus. And still another time in his spiritual journey, he was under the tutelage of Muhammad. So these legacies are available to all who purify themselves and enter into that barzakh where the inner world and the outer world meet. And if one approaches that interworld in a spirit of true glorification of God and service of humanity and veneration toward the prophets and prophetesses and masters and saints, one very well may find oneself under the tutelage of the particular light, the particular guidance of a holy being who has left a powerful legacy in this world. And when we gather for universal worship, we are naming the names of many of those great beings. We can never name all of them, but we do that in order to show that, yes, we see that they are one lineage. In essence, they are one being. They are guidance itself, personified in these various personalities. We regard them all as sacred, and we see that each has a particular contribution to the mosaic of the human spirit. Moreover, in turning toward the spirit of guidance, in turning toward a messenger, a prophet who is one's inspirer, what is it that allows you to recognize that being? It's possible because within you there is a counterpart to that being. And here we come to the philosophy of Imam al-Ghazali, who speaks of 5 faculties of the mind. And these are the sensory, the imaginative, the faculty of intelligence, the discursive faculty, and fifthly, the prophetic spirit. That is an inherent, essential faculty of the soul, but it's rarely actualized in a human being. For most of us, it's dormant. But we can recognize prophecy because deep in the depths of every soul, that capacity is part of the fitra of human beings. It's part of the nature that divinity has conferred upon humanity. So when we draw near to what is innermost in us, we're drawn toward that core that naturally recognizes its own actualization, its own fulfillment in the great beings, in the prophets and messengers. And one idealizes them, which is to say, one conceives them in the form of the greatest goodness. And so if a Hindu would speak of the greatness of Krishna, and a Christian would speak of the greatness of Christ, they might speak, both of them, very similarly, and might seem to be speaking of the same being, because both are describing that potentiality which is the perfection of the human state. And therefore, to speak of the universality of the spirit of guidance is to say that all human beings are capable of a devotion to the picture of human perfection, and by pursuing that devotion, more and more resonate with the ideal and manifest it in their own lives. And what is most important is the ideal itself. So to argue about which prophet is greater, which should be believed in or disbelieved in, is to miss the point of the ideal itself. All argumentation is far from the state of sincere inner alignment to a crystalline ideal that embodies the personification of goodness, of wholeness, of love, of kindness. And that's why when someone challenged Hazrat Inayat-khan once, when he mentioned a number of the prophets all in one breath and said, how could you name these others in the same sentence as you mention our Lord Jesus Christ? Do you claim that they are all equal, that they're all the same? He said, no, I don't claim that they are all equal. I only say that I don't consider myself equal to the task of judging between them. Because to judge between, you have to stand above. To stand above the prophets and say that one is better than the other, that is a great presumption. If one is moved by devotion, by a love of the ideal, one can only express one's wonderment, one's attraction, one's joy in the presence of such beings, and leave it there and say they all represent one thing, and that is the way of remembrance, the perfection of beauty on earth. So these are some reflections on the second Sufi thought. There is one master, the guiding spirit of all souls, who constantly leads followers toward the light.